Hey look, it's Doo-Doo Pile! Before I could turn and see who was cackling, something hit my back hard. I stumbled, my feet catching on the uneven ground I was walking on. I fell face first into the wet dirt. I looked up in time to see them riding away on their bikes and groaned. Of course, I had to be wearing a white t-shirt today. My mom was going to kill me. I sighed and pulled myself up, tried to wipe the dirt off my shirt, and continued on my way to school. It's all I could do, really. With a name like Dewey Pile, big ears that stuck out, and huge glasses, I was destined for a life of merciless teasing and bullying. And in a town as small as Beaver Falls, I was never going to escape it. Beaver Falls is an odd little town. With a population of under 1,000, we're a bit behind the times, lucky to even have electricity. The phone lines only worked when they felt like it, access to the internet was rare, and hardly anyone had a cell phone because they almost never worked. We all blamed it on the rain. It was always raining in Beaver Falls. I'm just a kid, but I've never seen the sun shine here. It's either pouring rain, drizzling, or thick grey clouds block out the whole sky. If you leave town, eventually you'll see the sun. But most people don't leave for long. They always come back. Those who do make it out and don't come back are never heard from again. Every so often, you can hear yelling and screaming from somewhere beyond the town. I've heard it my whole life. Sometimes people just stop and stare off in the direction of the screams, a solemn look on their faces. I asked everyone I can about it, but they never give me an answer, just a sad look and tell me not to worry about it. And then there's the beavers. I used to think they were a myth, just something parents used to scare their kids. If you don't behave, I'm going to feed you to the beavers. If you lie down, the beavers are going to come get you. Bad kids go see the beavers. Is that what you want? But as you get older, you start to realize the beavers are a lot like Santa. They don't exist, just something to keep the kids in line. Or at least I thought so, until I woke up at night. My watch read 3 a.m. My parents had gotten me a new digital watch last week for my birthday. It was the only thing I'd gotten, and it probably cost more than my parents could afford, but I was really proud of it. The rain was coming down hard, and a crack of thunder jolted me awake. I stared at the ceiling, waiting for sleep to overtake me, when I heard something clicking out in the street. I glanced out my window, the curtains blowing in the wind. I listened hard, waiting to see if I could hear anything besides the sound of the rain pelting the house. I held my breath, half expecting a blood-curdling scream to cut through the night. Then I heard it again, and my heart dropped. A faint clicking noise, followed by the sound of something heavy being dragged. It was coming closer to the house. I tore out of bed and up to the window, straining to see what was making the noise. I was breathing too heavy to hear anything else. I felt on edge, every nerve of my being waiting. My heart pounded and my eyes strained to see the slightest movement. But my heart stopped and my insides froze when I saw it. As something walked into the dim light of the street lamp, I froze. It was huge and hairy. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, trying to see better, but I left my glasses on the nightstand. I raced back to my bed and pulled them on, but by the time I got back to the window, it was too late. Whatever it was gone now. "Mom! Mom!" I screamed. I was panicking now. It's here, I thought. What if it attacked the house? Was it here to kill someone? Would it carry someone off? But my mom never came. I ran out of my room, down the hall, and into my parents' room. My dad was snoring loudly, likely passed out with the help of his good friend Jack Daniels. "Mom! Mom! There's something outside," I whispered, shaking my mom. "Don't wake your father," she whispered, her words heavy with sleep. "It's just the beavers." She rolled onto her side and dropped off to sleep again. I wandered back to my bed and sat on it. My head was buzzing with confusion. So much for that, I thought. Were they real? Did I really see a giant beaver? If they were real, then what did that mean? From then on, I looked at my life a little differently. If the beavers were real, then what else was? Of course, none of my classmates believed me. There was only one school in Beaver Falls, and it was way outdated. It desperately needed repairs, it was overdue for a new roof, and it leaked every time it rained. The desks were old and rickety, and some of the textbooks were missing pages. We didn't even have a schoolyard for recess. With all of the rain, there was no point. We spent our lunch and recess in the classrooms. Every year, you were stuck with the same kids through every grade. All the students in each year fit into one classroom, and one teacher taught everything each class would need. They were tired and overworked, and from the state of it, so was the school. We were in 5th grade now. No way, you're crazy. They're made up. What's next? You believe in Santa and the Easter Bunny? My classmates sneered at me. I hung my head and went back to my desk. It was raining as usual, so we couldn't go outside for recess. We were stuck in the same classroom all day. My classmates were so adamant though. Had I imagined it? I was so enraptured in my thoughts about the night before and the beavers that I missed most of the questions in the math quiz that day. Mrs. Wilson handed us our graded quizzes and we left for the day. She gave me a stern look and a big red F glared back at me from the paper. I sighed and started making my way home. I've seen them too. Her voice startled me and I jumped, whirling around. There was a girl leaning against the school right outside the main entrance. She was tall and thin, red curly hair framing her face. She stared at me with cold, brown eyes. She was in my class. Her name was Mary Alice, and there were rumours about her having an evil eye, but I didn't know what that meant. I'd asked my mum once, and she yelled at me for spreading rumours and gossiping about other people like a yenta. But her eye did look pretty bad. The skin around her left eye was gnarled and scarred. The eye itself was white and milky, contrasting her other eye, which was so brown it almost looked black. It made me shudder just thinking about it. No one knew for sure how it had gotten like that, and everyone was too afraid to ask. But the rumours were awful. What? I asked, not sure what she was talking about. The way she was staring at me made me uncomfortable. The beavers, I've seen them too. My grandma said they come into town sometimes when they get hungry, she said, pushing off from the wall and walking past me. She turned back and looked at me, tilting her head to the side. Are you coming? I just stared at her. She shrugged and continued walking. Wait, I scrambled after her. When did you see them? From time to time. They only come at night. My grandma said they used to live here, but when humans started settling here, they retreated into the forest. She said when they come into town, they're looking for people who have been bad. They carry them off and they're never seen again. Where do they go? I asked. She didn't answer, but the look she gave me turned my mouth dry. I swallowed hard. We walked in silence for a while, gravel and dirt crunching under our sneakers. It wasn't raining, but thick clouds in the sky threatened a torrential downpour. I glanced at Alice, wanting to ask her about something that was nagging me, but afraid of what her answer might be. What? She sighed, not even looking at me. Had she known I was staring at her? Would your grandma know about the screaming? I asked. It came out as more of a hoarse whisper. She said it's the bad people. Mary Alice looked down, like she was trying to choose her words carefully. Her voice was quiet. She said if you're bad, the beavers come to get you. They carry you off and then they eat you. The screams are from the people eaten alive. They use your bones to build their dams." I suddenly felt sick to my stomach. I wished I hadn't asked. We walked in silence for the rest of the way. I wondered why she was even walking with me, but I didn't want to ask. Mary Alice never talked to anyone. Mary Alice didn't have any friends. Everyone stayed away from her because of her evil eye. When my house came into view in all its dilapidated glory, my heart sank. The house needed a lot of work, but Dad was always too drunk to fix it, and he wouldn't allow Mom to do anything. He said it was man's work, but then he just spent the afternoon passed out on the couch. Mom tried to call someone once to come clean the gutters, and it didn't go well. And now, as we approached my house, I could see my dad was sitting on the porch with a bottle of whiskey in his hand. Even from where we were, I could see he had a mean look in his eyes. Mary Alice stopped when she saw him. I stopped too, and looked at her curiously. I felt a little embarrassed about the state of my house and my father, but it was pretty common in Beaver Falls. Mary Alice was standing perfectly still, rigid and tense. She squeezed her eyes shut and pressed her fingers to her temples. "Hey, are you okay?" I asked. "Is that your dad?" She struggled to speak through clenched teeth. "Yeah, why?" "I gotta go," she said simply. "Whatever happens, don't leave your room tonight. It'll be over soon." Then she turned and walked back the way she had come. Her words hung heavy in the air. What did she mean? It occurred to me that Mary Alice lived on the other side of town. I looked back at my dad. There was a cold, hard look in his eyes. I fought the urge to turn and run, and instead forced myself to walk closer to my house. Dad could be unpredictable when he drank, and I couldn't remember a time when he didn't have a bottle in his hand. Sometimes he just passed out and did nothing. Other times he was cruel. Mum always sent me to my room when he was like that. But sometimes, at night, I would hear him crying, telling my mum how sorry he was, begging her not to leave him. I wasn't sure why we didn't leave him to rot in this house. I asked my mum once, but all she said was I would understand when I was older. She had an odd look in her eye then, like she was hurt or something. I walked the rest of the way to the house, trying to ignore my father leering at me. I averted my eyes, but I could feel his gaze on me. "Ah, that your girlfriend? A pussy like you. Thought you were gay." He took another swig of whiskey. I ignored him. "Hey, I'm talking to you, boy. You ought to show me some respect." He grabbed my leg as I continued up the steps to the front door, but missed and fell over, tumbling down the steps and landing on his back on the ground. Whiskey splashed all over the steps, the ground, and my dad. He sputtered as I looked at him. He was pathetic. You waste of space. Get back here." He let out a string of curses as I went inside. My mom was in the kitchen washing the dishes. "Just ignore him, Dewey," she said, folding me into a hug. She pulled back and looked at me. "Why don't you go to your room? I'll bring you something to eat later. Best just to stay out of his way." I nodded and retreated to my room, shutting the door behind me. I spent so much time here. Sometimes it felt like a prison, but it was the place I was safest from Dad. I sat at my desk and started on my homework. It wasn't long until I was bored and looking for something else to do. I pulled a comic book from my bookshelf and started reading that instead. I lost track of how many hours passed. The sound of something crashing somewhere in the house broke my concentration. I looked outside to see the sun had already set. Muffled yelling brought my attention back to whatever was happening in the house. I got up from my bed and crept to the door, pressing my ear to the crack between it and the doorframe. I wanted to open the door and see what was going on, but Mary Alice's warning echoed in my head. Laughing at his drunk old dad. Who does he think he is, the little twerp? My dad was in another drunken rage, slamming things and yelling at my mom. There was a pause and my mom spoke quietly, trying to calm him. I couldn't hear what she said. I don't care. I never wanted him in the first place. He's a freak. There was a crash as my dad threw something and it shattered. More hushed words from my mom. And then my dad stomped down the hall towards my room. Instinctively, I grabbed my desk chair and shoved it under the doorknob. I rushed back toward my bed and slid under it, just as my dad's boots stopped at my door. I clamped my hand over my mouth, trying to quiet my breathing. My heart raced as I watched the doorknob twist and turn. Then the door shook as my dad slammed his fist on it. I knew if he got the door open, I would be in trouble. Alan, stop it! My mom screamed. There was a crack, and then his assault on the door continued. I watched the chair in horror, but it held fast. I'm gonna kill him, my dad roared. I squeezed my eyes shut and covered my ears, trying to block out the yelling and the banging. It was hours before I moved, but the house was silent by then. My watch beeped, indicating it was 11 p.m. I'd been messing around with the watch after I'd gotten it, and programmed it to let me know when it got to that hour. But as much as I tried, I couldn't figure out how to get it to stop doing that. I crawled out of my hiding place and removed the chair, carefully setting it back at my desk. I opened my door as quietly as I could. The house was dark, except for the light from the kitchen spilling into the hallway. I tiptoed my way there, careful not to step in places where I knew the floor would creak. I found my mom standing at the sink, drinking a glass of whiskey. Mom? I whispered. My voice shook and my heart stopped as she turned to look at me. Red marks wrapped around her neck and a bruise was forming around one of her eyes. It's okay. He's not here, she said, setting a glass on the counter. She looked disappointed and tired. Are you hungry? I nodded. It's going to be better around here, Dewey. I'll talk to him. I'll make sure he understands he can't act like that anymore, or he'll have to leave, okay? She pulled a plate from the cabinet and started making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I sat at the table, unsure of what to say. The silence was heavy around us while she made the sandwich. She cut the crust off and slid the plate in front of me. I took a huge bite. I was ravenous. He didn't mean it, you know, what he said. My mom looked at me sadly. Yes, he did, I said in a small voice. She sighed and took a gulp from a glass. She didn't say anything else. I finished my sandwich. My mom gave me a hug and a kiss and sent me off to bed. In the morning, my dad still hadn't come home. The bruise around my mom's eye had turned a deep purple. She set a bowl of cereal down for me at the table when I came into the kitchen. It was Friday, but I wasn't in a good mood. After last night's events, I wasn't looking forward to another weekend my dad would spend drunk. Does it hurt? I asked. She just shook her head. Hey, you haven't mentioned Martin lately. Are you two still friends? I nodded. Martin was a kid my age, and I guess he was the closest thing to a friend, but he could get annoying sometimes. He always had to be right, and he loved to remind people that he was asthmatic, so he never wanted to play games, but he was also the biggest weenie I'd ever met. Why don't you two have a sleepover? It's been a while since you've hung out, my mom suggested. A sleepover might not be a bad idea. It would get me away from my dad. No rain that morning, just a grey sky. I got to school early and was surprised to see Mary Alice waiting to greet me. Did you do your homework last night? She asked, but there was a look in her eyes, like she already knew the answer. I shook my head. I didn't think so. Here. She pulled her own homework out of her backpack and handed it to me. I looked at her, dumbfounded. "You're letting me copy yours?" "Sure," she said, and then she turned and walked off. I sat down on a bench and got to work quickly. "Dewey, was that Mary Alice?" I looked up to see Martin had come over. "Yeah, she's letting me copy her homework. Rough night. You know she has the evil eye though, right?" Martin looked panicked as he sat down. "Yeah, but what does that even mean?" "I don't know. Melanie said if she looks at you with it, she can put a curse on you, and Tyler said it means her eye is going to rot and fall out of her head. Chris said it means her grandma's a witch and she put a spell on Mary Alice when she was still in her mom's stomach, and now Mary Alice can see the dead." Martin was talking frantically, causing him to breathe heavily. "Do you really think all of that's true?" I put my pencil down and looked at him carefully. "Don't you think if any of that is true, something would have happened by now?" "Well, Martin scrambled for an explanation, but came up blank. "Seriously, man, don't believe everything you hear. Sure, it looks bad, but you've got your own crap to worry about, with your dad and all." That shut Martin up. The bell rang and I rushed to copy a few more answers before shuffling the papers up and passing them back to Mary Alice as we entered the school. The rest of the day flew by. "Hey, my mom wants to know if we can have a sleepover tonight," I asked Martin as we exited the school. The sky was still grey, but a light drizzle was coming down. "I'm sure my mom will be fine with it," he said. We both knew sleepover was code for, "Can you watch my kid for a night? I need a break." "Sleepover, huh? Maybe I'll crash it," Mary Alice remarked as she joined us. Martin immediately went pale. I chuckled. "You can't come to a boys' sleepover. You're a girl." "I don't have to sleep over, but I can still come over." She stared at me with cold, unyielding eyes. I could see Martin shaking his head adamantly. "We can go looking for the beavers." "What?" Martin and I both said in unison. We stopped in our tracks. My stomach clenched with dread. "The beavers? We can get proof they're real. I got a camera last Christmas. We can take a picture of them and prove they really do exist and they're not just made up. And then those guys at school will start making fun of you. You guys want to come to my house today?" Mary Alice said it so casually, like we were going to go to the store and get some pop. "Dewey, we can't go to her house. Her grandma's a witch," Martin hissed in my ear. Mary Alice whirled around and glared at us. "Really? You of all people should know better than to spread rumours." Her voice was ice cold, and Martin turned beet red. "Sure, we'll come," I said, trying to smooth out the tension in the air. "Well, I'll come." And that was how we found ourselves at the door to the witch's lair. "Well, I'll come." And that was how we found ourselves at the door to the witch's lair. Except, not really. Mary Alice's house looked relatively normal. Sure, it was a little run down, the yard was a little overgrown, but that's how most houses were here. Her house was made of bricks that were once red, but had now more of a faded dirt colour. Ivy crawled all over her house, and the grass grew high. "This is where you live?" Martin asked incredulously. He had insisted on tagging along, so if something happened to me, someone would know about it. "Yeah, why?" Mary Alice asked. "It's so normal," Martin replied. Truthfully, her house looked in better condition than most of the houses in town. Mary Alice shrugged. "My family was one of the original settlers here, way back." She opened the front door and we went inside. As we took off our shoes, I looked at the house around me. It was warm, cozy, more inviting than my own house was. A delicious smell wafted out from the kitchen and my stomach growled. I flushed with embarrassment as they both turned to look at me. All I'd eaten that day was the cereal my mom had given me for breakfast. My mom rarely packed a lunch for me. "Grammy, I'm home," Mary Alice called out as she made her way to the kitchen. "I brought some friends. I hope that's okay." We followed her and found an ancient-looking woman standing at an old oven. She set down a plate of chocolate chip cookies on the kitchen table, pulled Mary Alice in for a hug, and planted a kiss on the top of her head. "Oh, well, hello. How wonderful it is to see you. It's been far too long since we've had guests here," she said. "Come in, sit. You look hungry." I flushed again, and it felt like her eyes pierced right through me. "This is Martin and Dewey," Mary Alice said, sitting down and grabbing a cookie. "Of course, how lovely to meet you," Grammy exclaimed. "Make yourselves comfortable. I'll leave you kids be." She gave us a wink and headed off into the house. "Are you going to sit or what?" I asked Martin as I climbed into a chair and grabbed a cookie. Martin was still standing in the doorway, frozen. He forced himself to walk over and climbed into a chair next to me, but his eyes were wide. "Have a cookie," Mary Alice said, biting into another one. As I bit into mine, the cookie melted in my mouth. There was nothing better than fresh-baked cookies. "What if they're poisoned?" Martin whispered to me. I don't think he intended for Mary Alice to hear him, but she rolled her eyes. "Whatever, more for me," I told him as I bit into another heavenly cookie. "So, what do you want to do?" "Let's go to my room. We can play a game." Mary Alice grabbed the plate of cookies and raced down the hall and up a set of stairs. Mary Alice's room was not what I expected. Her walls were painted a lavender colour and she had potted plants in both of the windows. Her bed was neatly made. No clothes were on the floor, and tall bookcases stretched from the floor to the ceiling, crammed with books. Some of them were so worn and old that I couldn't read the spines. A dollhouse sat in one corner, an exact replica of her own house. Mary Alice and I sat down on the floor with a plate of cookies between us. Martin followed us, looking around her room in wonder. "You knit?" he scoffed. "Isn't that for old ladies?" "I make blankets and donate them to the shelter and the community centre," Mary Alice replied, giving him a sharp look. "So, what game do we want to play?" I asked. Martin sat down next to me and gingerly took a cookie. His whole demeanour changed as soon as he bit into it. "Truth or dare?" Mary Alice exclaimed. I immediately felt uneasy. I'd never actually played Truth or Dare before, but I knew it could easily get out of hand. "Who goes first?" Martin asked nervously. "Dewey, Truth or Dare?" Mary Alice asked. Dare, I guess." "I dare you," a wicked look crossed her eyes, "to stick your tongue in Martin's ear." "What? No," Martin squirmed, but I knew I had to. I shut my eyes, stuck my tongue out, and got it over with. The sour taste of earwax lingered in my mouth. "Okay, Martin, truth or dare?" I looked at him. I knew he wasn't one for risks, so I already knew what he would choose. "Truth. What's the most embarrassing thing that's happened to you?" Martin shifted uncomfortably. Last summer, a bunch of us went swimming in a creek. I had to, pass gas, but it, Martin's face went beet red. "That was you?" Mary Alice fell over giggling. "You're the one who pooped in the creek?" she asked between laughs. Martin frowned and looked at her challengingly. "Mary Alice," he said firmly. She immediately stopped laughing and sat up. "Truth or dare?" "Truth," she said defiantly. "What really happened to your eye?" A cold silence filled the air. Mary Alice looked down dolefully. "Mary Alice, you don't have to," I started. Martin glared at me. It was clear he wanted his revenge. Mary Alice took a deep breath. "When I was born, my eyes were two different colours. The other one was red, like the colour was red. And my dad..." She took a deep breath before continuing. "Grammy says my dad was a paranoid schizophrenic. He stopped taking his medicine and he didn't like my eye. He said it was from the devil. One night he took a knife and tried to cut my eye out. My mom tried to stop him and he stabbed her. When she wouldn't stop bleeding, he ran away. My mom died and they arrested my dad. So now I'm half blind and I live with my grandma. But I can see things with my blind eye. I can see things about people no one else can see. I can tell when people are bad." I stared at her, dumbfounded. A sick feeling was twisting around in my stomach. Neither of us knew what to say, what we could say. "I'm sorry," I said, but she interrupted me. "Martin, truth or dare?" There was a venomous look in her eye, and I knew what was going to happen. Martin was silent for a moment, weighing his options. I think he knew what was coming too. "Truth," he said finally. "Where's your dad?" It was more of a daring statement than a question. This time, it was Martin's turn to look down. I already knew what had happened to Martin's dad, but no one else did. His mom was pretty embarrassed and wouldn't talk about it at all. He ran off with some guy who was having an affair with, probably the entire time my parents were married. Apparently, he's always been that way, and my mom just trapped him by having me. "Well, that's not so bad. What's wrong with being gay?" Mary Alice asked. But we all knew not all of the residents of Beaver Falls were as understanding. "I've tried calling him sometimes, but even when the call goes through, he never calls me back. I haven't seen him since he left. It's like he doesn't even care about me anymore." Martin continued. "My dad's the town drunk," I piped up, trying to smooth out the tension. "I can't remember a day in my life when he wasn't drinking. He hit my mom last night, and he said he never wanted me, and he wanted to kill me." More uncomfortable silence. No one knew what to say to each other. "Well, aren't we a bunch of pathetic outcasts?" Mary Alice chuckled. We all laughed then at how awful our home lives were. "Is it raining?" Martin suddenly exclaimed. We all turned to look at the window. The clouds looked almost black, and it was indeed starting to drizzle. "Oh no," I said, scrambling up. "We gotta go. We got a long walk ahead of us. We gotta go." Martin stood up. I gave Mary Alice an apologetic smile, and we both turned and ran out of the room and down the stairs to pull our shoes on, leaving her on the floor with the cookies. After Martin and I parted ways, I thought about what the Truth or Dare game had revealed about each one of us. I shivered as I thought about what Mary Alice's dad had tried to do to her. How could a parent try to hurt their own child so much? But I guess the same could be said about my dad. Martin's situation was bad in its own way too, although not as severe as mine or Mary Alice's. I vowed if I ever had a kid, I would be nothing like any of ours were. Just before I turned down my street, a scream pierced the air and I jumped. My heart jackhammered inside my chest and I whirled around, trying to find where it was coming from. It sounded like it was coming from everywhere. The screams came again and adrenaline filled my veins as I ran the rest of the way to my house. By the time I got home, it was pouring and I was soaked through. I climbed up the porch stairs, my wet clothes weighing me down, and shoved the key into the lock on the front door. But It wouldn't go in. I frowned. "Mom?" I called out, trying to be heard over the pattering rain. I banged on the door as hard as I could. After a moment, my mom opened the door. "Oh, you're finally home," she said, looking relieved. "And you're soaking wet. Go take a hot shower, and I'll make you something warm to eat when you're done." I did as I was told, relishing the warm water. By the time my dad was done showering, there wasn't usually any hot water left. When I emerged from the steaming bathroom, my mom had collected my wet clothes and dried the puddle they had made on the floor. I pulled some pajamas on and went into the kitchen. My mom was stirring something in a pot on the stove. "Why didn't my key work?" I asked her, climbing into a chair. "I had the locks changed." "Oh?" I said, unsure of what to say. She slid a grilled cheese in front of me and then a bowl of steaming hot soup. I looked at it in wonder. Soup was a staple in our house, even in the summer, because of how cheap it was, but we hadn't had grilled cheese in a long time. One of my dad's favourite drunken snacks was grilled cheese, and he made it so often that my mom had just stopped buying cheese because he went through it so quickly. "Things are going to be different around here," she said, turning back to the stove and serving herself some soup. "But what about—" I was going to ask about my dad. How would he get home if the locks were changed? "Don't you worry about him," my mom said. "Did you ask Martin about a sleepover?" "Yeah, he said it would be okay." "After you eat, pack some clothes and your sleeping bag and I'll drive you over. It's going to rain all night and I don't want you walking around in it." I nodded and started in on my meal. It was a short drive to Martin's, and his mom looked exhausted when she opened the door. She apologized for the mess and exchanged pleasantries with my mom while I passed them to find Martin. He was playing Donkey Kong on his Nintendo 64. The thing was ancient, but still worked like it was brand new. He had bought it from the pawn shop in town 3 years prior after saving up his allowance for the whole year. "Hey, I brought my raincoat," I said, dropping my voice to a whisper. Martin looked at me, puzzled. "What for?" "For when we find the beavers." "We're not going out there," Martin said, turning his attention back to his game. Diddy Kong was shooting peanuts at bright blue beavers. "For starters, it's raining. Secondly, my mom would never let us go out. Third, Mary Alice doesn't know where I live. And fourth, if we go out to that forest in the middle of the night, we're going to die." After a night of video games, frozen pizza and junk food, we both fell into our respective beds long after his mom turned in for the night. I wasn't used to eating so much food in one day, and my belly hurt. But just as I started to drift off to sleep, there was a tap at Martin's window. Clink. My heart skipped a beat as we both sat up and looked at each other. Clink. There it was again. My heart thudded in my ears as we crept to the window, trying to see what was making that noise. A flash of lightning lit up Martin's front yard, and we saw a small, green figure standing there. I grinned at Martin, dug out my raincoat, pulled it on, and tiptoed to his front door. "Dewey, we're not going out there," Martin hissed, trying not to wake his mom. "Why not? Don't you want to know if they're real?" "No, and especially not in the rain, not in a storm." "When is it not raining here?" I retorted. "Fine, you can stay here, but I need to borrow your bike." I carefully unlocked and opened his front door and ran outside. "Finally," Mary Alice exclaimed as I approached. She was wearing her raincoat, which was green. Mine was black. A purple bike was parked behind her. "Martin's not coming," I said. I was giddy with excitement. I'd never snuck out before, especially at night. "We'll be better off without him," she said. "Wait for me," Martin whisper shouted as he came to join us in a blue raincoat. He brought his bike down from the porch and got on. I climbed on, sitting between his handlebars, while Mary Alice climbed on hers. We rode in silence, only the street lamps and the occasional blink of lightning lighting our way. Mary Alice led the way, and I wondered if she knew where to go, and if she had been out into the forest before. Thunder rumbled ominously, and I wondered if what we were doing was wrong, if we should turn back. We followed her through town, down the main street, turning towards the old abandoned lumber mill and the hiking trail that led towards the mountain. That was where everyone said the beavers lived, near the giant waterfall that ran through the forest. It was supposedly where the town got its name. "Watch out!" Mary Alice called back as she suddenly veered to the right. We were about halfway up the hiking trail when a pair of headlights swung around ahead of us. Martin turned sharply, and with me on the handlebars, he lost balance. We both fell, toppling into the underbrush. My heart was racing and I froze as I watched the car roll past us. I let out a breath I didn't know I had been holding, but ice filled my veins as I recognized a familiar magnet on the back of the car. Panic rose in my throat and my stomach twisted. "Wasn't that your—" Martin said. "Mom," I finished, frowning. "What's she doing out here?" "Let's go," Mary Alice whispered, walking a bike back out to the trail. "I think this is where it splits off anyway." She pointed at a picnic table set across the path. A small tree had grown through the middle of it. It was a popular landmark that indicated you were about halfway up the trail. Just as we passed the table, a blood-curdling scream filled the air, and it sounded close. "What the hell was that?" Mary Alice whispered. My skin prickled and goosebumps broke out across my flesh under my raincoat. I think we should leave," Martin whimpered. A scraping noise filled the air, followed by another scream. "No, we came here for proof. That's what we're going to get. All we need to do is take a picture," Mary Alice said, unbuttoning her raincoat and exposing her camera. "Just one picture," I agreed, despite the feeling that I should turn around, go back the way we came, and pretend this never happened. Mary Alice leaned a bike against the picnic table and stepped into the forest, following the sound of screaming. Eventually, the screaming died down, and all we were left with was the sound of rain falling in the forest. We shuffled through wet leaves and sticks. Trees, tall and thick, loomed high above us. The smell of wet foliage surrounded us. I'd only been up here once when I was a kid. We came here on a field trip to study the ecosystem. Even though it was only a few years ago, it felt like it had been much longer than that. The forest looked much different now too. Back then, it had been another grey day, but the leaves were every hue of green. We overturned logs and rocks, looking for wriggling bugs beneath them. We took samples of water from ponds and streams to look at under microscopes. Now, the forest seemed mysterious, dark and foreboding, like it was hiding a horrible secret. The air was cold and chilly, the storm was relentless, and the more we waded in deeper, the more I wanted to go home. Occasionally, the scraping noise filled the space around the trees and sent chills up my spine. "Hey," I whispered, getting the attention of my friends. I pointed to deep grooves that had been dug into the ground. Tire tracks. They led us to a river. The ground squished under our sneakers as we walked. It felt like we had been walking forever, and my feet were starting to hurt. "What's that?" Martin whispered, startling me, and I jumped. We could see a light up ahead, and someone was talking loudly. We crouch-walked until we were close enough to see and hear what was going on. We dug down behind a bush. A pickup truck was parked near it. Its headlights were on, illuminating the forest ahead. "You shouldn't have crossed me, Marcos," a voice called out. I peeked over the bush to see 3 people standing in the truck bed. "You shouldn't have crossed me, Marcos," a voice called out. I peeked over the bush to see 3 people standing in the truck bed. Then someone was kicked out of the truck. He fell onto the ground with a grunt and scrambled to stand up. His arms were tied behind him. A second person jumped out of the truck and dragged the first to his feet, then dragged him in front of the truck. I recognized the first person immediately. His name was Marcos, and he was an engineer. He worked with a construction company, which is where I recognized the second person. I'd seen him with a construction crew when they worked fixing up houses and roads. I was pretty sure his name was Vinny, and he was always glued to his boss's side, which means the person in the truck must have been Tony. They were bad news. They were always cutting corners on their projects and drinking on the job. No one told me, but I always stayed out of the way out of instinct. But what were they doing out here? "Did you really think you could just throw me under the bus like that? That it wouldn't get back to me?" Tony was saying. "You're a stupid sack of trash." He jumped from the back of the truck to join them. He kicked Marcos again. "Yeah, did you really think you could leave town and turn us in?" Vinny sneered. "You know you can't leave this town. And trying to turn us into the feds? The local police are in our pocket, you idiot. They know exactly what's going on, and they get a cut of every deal that goes on," Tony continued. "Please, I made a mistake. I'm sorry. I'll do anything you want. I'll give you anything you want. Just please, don't do this," Marcos pleaded. "See, that's your problem. You don't have anything I want. You're no use to me, and now we can't trust you," Tony chuckled. "No, please," Marcos cried out. There was a pause, and my blood froze as I thought I saw something big and hulking moving around just beyond the reach of the headlights. I looked at Mary Alice and Martin. Both of their eyes were wide with fear. They had seen it too. I turned back and watched as Vinny stooped to pick something up. Then he pulled back his arm and threw something. There was a soft thud and primal grunt as whatever was thrown made contact with something else. Vinny repeated his actions until there was a low hissing noise. Vinny and Tony ran back to the truck as something huge and furry lumbered into the light. Thunder rumbled again, and a chill gripped my spine. I recognized it immediately as one of the fabled beavers. Its long, yellow teeth jutted down and glinted, its enormous tail dragged behind it. My stomach twisted, and I felt all the blood drain from my body. The beaver growled as it stepped closer to Marcos. It opened its mouth. He screamed in anguish as blood rushed down from his wound, but the beaver didn't stop. Marcos continued to scream as the beaver's protruding teeth bit into his skin again. There was a chewing, scraping noise as it tore the flesh from his arm, picking the bone clean. The pale bone glinted as another flash of lightning cut through the sky. A wet, squelching noise came from it as it chewed its meal. My stomach rolled, and I thought I might puke. I dug down behind the bush, breathing heavily. Marcos had stopped screaming, but the sound was still ringing in my ears. The forest was spinning in front of me. I thought I could see Martin and Mary Alice trying to get my attention, but I was having a hard time focusing on them. Just as I turned to tell them we should leave, a beeping cut through the forest. A sick feeling came over me as I frantically tried to stop the alarm from my watch. A heavy silence filled the forest as I held my breath and waited to see what would happen. "Who's there?" Tony called out. Mary Alice and Martin were frozen with fear beside me. I heard the click of a gun before Vinny spoke. "Either you come out or I'm coming over there." On shaky legs, I pulled myself up and forced myself to walk out of our hiding place. Every instinct in my body told me to run. Mary Alice and Martin followed me. Martin looked like he might crap his pants. "And what do we have here?" Tony crooned. "Kids? You shouldn't be out here all by yourselves. Come here, we'll take you home." A sinister smile grew across his face. "Dewey, we need to leave," Mary Alice warned through gritted teeth. She was holding her eye and hunched over in pain. "He's not a good guy. We can't trust him." I looked between Tony and Vinny and the beaver, who was still chewing on Marcus's arm, the bone glinting in the light. "Get ready to run," I whispered. "Towards the beaver," Mary Alice breathed. Martin didn't say anything. "Come here," Tony commanded. His face was full of anger and irritation. 1, 2... I tensed, ready to run. 3, Mary Alice hissed. We took off, rushing past the beaver. It watched us go, moving on to chew on Marcus's other arm. The truck revved and bolted after us. Panting heavily, I tore through the woods, dodging trees and branches. I kept the river next to me as I ran, but I didn't know left from right out here. For all I knew, I could be heading right into the beaver's den. And that's exactly where we ended up. I stopped abruptly, realizing where we were. Beavers were everywhere, and they were huge, as big as a horse. "Quick," Mary Alice said, pulling us behind a beaver. Its fur was thick and wet from the rain, but it didn't seem to mind us. We hid behind the beaver, trying to catch our breath. Light spilling into the area as the truck pulled in and rumbled to a stop. "I know you're here. This is the end of the line for you," Vinny called out. I took in my surroundings, trying to come up with a plan. I could see 8 beavers in the area. 2 were treading water in the river. The rest were milling about or waiting to see what would happen. I could see the dam further up the river, and my stomach twisted as I could see it was made up of branches, trees, and bones. One of the beavers in the water had a bone in its mouth as it swam towards the dam. I watched as it packed it in with the other logs and branches. Other bones were scattered within it, and I shuddered as I thought about how many people must have died and whose bones were now built into the dam. A crack filled the air, and my spine turned to rubber. They had fired a gun. Suddenly, all the beavers growled and hissed. The one we were hiding behind heaved as it breathed heavily. The 2 in the river slapped their tails against the water in warning. I was so afraid I thought I might pee myself. I looked at my friends. Martin was shaking. "I'm not going to tell you again," Tony yelled. There was another click as he cocked his gun again. The forest was filled with the sounds of growling beavers. Another crack sounded as he fired the gun again. Silence followed. But only for a second. And then, the beavers attacked. They rushed the truck, swinging their thick tails and slamming them against the truck. It wasn't long before they managed to knock it over, Vinny and Tony scrambling out from inside it. "Let's go," Mary Alice grabbed my hand and pulled me along with her. She had Martin in her other hand. We rushed past the truck as the beavers descended on it. Horrible screams filled the air as we passed. The sound of chewing and scraping filled the sky again, coupled with the screams of pain. We raced back the way we came, my heart beating in my ears. I was starting to wonder if we would get out of here alive, but I gulped down my fear and pressed on. "Wait," I skidded to a stop and looked back. "I can't." Martin was wheezing and holding his chest. "What's wrong?" Mary Alice asked. "He's asthmatic. He needs his inhaler. Where is it?" I shouted. From the corner of my eye, I could see the beaver who had been eating Marcos. Its eyes were alert and trained on us. "At home." Martin struggled to speak. "We have to carry him," I said, as Mary Alice and I took each of his arms to support him. But we'd only made it a few steps when he let out a yelp, and something tugged us back. He let out a scream just as I looked back to see the first beaver we had encountered sink its teeth into Martin's leg. "Go without me. You have to." His screams pierced my ears. I looked into his eyes, the eyes of the closest friend I had, who I'd spent countless nights playing video games with and having sleepovers. How could I just leave him? He let out another scream as the beaver bit down again. Mary Alice grabbed my hand and dragged me up. We ran until my legs burned, but I pressed on anyway. When we got back to the picnic table, we grabbed the bikes and rode down the hiking trail back into town. The screams from the forest haunted us the whole way. We went right to the police station. We told them what happened. I expected the police to laugh at us, to not believe us. But they did believe us. The two officers who questioned us shared an odd look when we mentioned Tony and Marcos, but they said nothing. They called our parents to collect us. Martin's mom arrived first, demanding to know what happened. The police consoled her, promised her they were pulling together a team to go looking for Martin. But I knew better. My mom arrived next, crushing me to her. "Oh, Dewey, are you hurt? Are you all right?" she asked. Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked me over. "Just a little bruised, I guess," I said numbly. I was still trying to process the events swirling around in my head. "Let's go. We're leaving," she said in a hushed tone. When I got to the car, I was surprised to see it was packed. "Mom?" "Get in the car, Dewey." She said nothing else. I got in the front seat and buckled my seatbelt. We rode in silence until we came to an old, weathered, "Now leaving Beaver Falls, we hope you had a damn good time" sign, and then passed it. My mom stiffened as blinking red lights waited for us just beyond the city limits. The chief of police stepped forward with his hands up as my mom slowed the car and rolled down the window. "Ma'am, I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to turn around and go back the way you came." "Why?" my mom asked, her voice shaking. "Ma'am, you know we're investigating the disappearance of your husband, and you're a key witness." Neither of us said anything on the drive back to our house until we pulled into the driveway. I glanced at Mom. She looked exhausted, like she had had decades since the last time I'd seen her. I took a deep breath, and then I spoke. "Mom, why were you out there in the woods tonight?" She squeezed her eyes like she was in pain. She didn't answer right away, like she was weighing her options, trying to figure out how to answer me. "Why were you out there, Dewey? You were supposed to be at Martin's." She wouldn't look at me. She kept her eyes trained on the steering wheel. "Where is Dad?" I asked. It came out more like a challenge instead of answering a question. She didn't answer that either. She sat back, leaning her head back on the headrest, and closed her eyes. I waited for her to answer, but she didn't. Neither of us said anything. We just sat there in silence. My mother's truth hung heavy in the air. I knew why she was out there, and I think she knew that I knew too. There was a lot for me to process. The closest thing I had to a friend was now gone, forever. My father would never be coming home. And now this. After everything I witnessed tonight, the bullying I'd experienced throughout my life seemed so insignificant. I noticed Mary Alice was sitting on our porch. I left my mom in the car. The door slamming shut behind me punctured our conversation. As I climbed up the steps, I tore off my raincoat, but my clothes were soaked underneath. I threw it down on the floor beneath us and looked at Mary Alice. "What happened?" she asked. "We can't leave," I said. She nodded knowingly. We didn't really have anything else to say. We both needed to think about what had happened, what we had seen. She handed me something and then jumped down the stairs, climbed onto a bike, and rode off into the rain. it was her camera. I turned it on. There was only one picture. A beaver was standing behind Marcos, his bloody arm in his mouth. His face was frozen in an eternal scream. At least I'd gotten my proof. I still wake up in the night when a beaver stumbles into town, its long nails clicking on the pavement, dragging its heavy tail behind it. I now understand the looks the townspeople get when screams fill the air, the pain and hurt behind their eyes. I understand what causes it and how. I know the secrets of this town now. But one day, I know I will leave this town and never look back.